we talk a little bit more, spend some time on these like transformations that y'all have made on your teams. I'd love to hear about before you kind of introduced Coder and CDEs. What was that before and after look like? Like, what have you been able to enable for your developers now? And how was that transformation journey like taken by your teams and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. So ours initially, the customer base for Coder, internal customer base, is still somewhat. We're just now starting. We've only been running Coder about 3 months, and we have about 300 users, and primarily focused on one product team. What I mentioned before, what kind of started that was a large dev cluster that more and more people were starting to use. And there were the problems with, differences between the development environment, tool chain, what was going on in CI, builds themselves taking a long time. No one could run unit tests, or they could run unit tests. They couldn't run any functional tests. So there was a lot of, and with CI and the concept of ownership, what we were seeing was this sort of the chuck it over the fence concept, meaning I will work on my code, and when I put it into the CI, if a test fails in CI, well, I don't know. It wasn't mine. I don't know. So, but when we shifted that internally, we brought in Coder. We were able to obviously reduce a lot of the friction around the tool chain and other things. But one of the things we noticed very interestingly was once developers had ownership, or if you and by ownership, possession of the tests being able to run locally, we found that they were much more likely to fix a test that they may not have owned because it was there. I don't know if this phrase is still used, but it's like possession is 9/10 of the law. Not a legal doctrine. Don't quote me on that. But it means that basically, if you have possession of something, you mentally, behaviorally feel like you own it, or you take responsibility for it. And we saw developers being more likely to fix things that may not have been what they owned or what they officially owned. So we saw a huge shift in behaviorally in some developers around quality. They were more willing they were running more tests, they were doing more stuff that they weren't doing before because they could, and because it was within their reach and it was easy. So
I think which is interesting, my transformation at Skydio felt a lot different to me, where it was very different because a lot of the problems ended up coming down to, all right, well, we need 32 gigabytes of RAM to fully build this project. Now we need 64. Well, we have 150 machines that all need to get 32 gigabytes of RAM. Or we want to move the code base up to the next version of Ubuntu. Okay, well, now there's going to be patch branches that are on one version, something on another version, and that's going to be very difficult. How do we get the operating system? Does everything have to be backwards compatible? We saw things like wanting to upgrade the version of CUDA that we're using. And it became this natural translation for like, man, it's really hard to write all the code to be able to downgrade everything on my system to the older release branch and all the way up to the newer release branch. So there was this natural, like, pretty easy transition to say, hey, what if you didn't have to write that code? What if you could just have two machines, one that can do the old branch, one that can do the new branch? What if you didn't have to downgrade your system? And there was just a lot of like, yes, that would be way easier. So we introduced a lot of the CDE environment as, this doesn't have to replace your model today. What if it was just the way that you did patches? What if it's the way you did old release branches? And then over time, that was like an easy sell. It doesn't matter if it was slower to start with because we were still figuring things out. Yeah. So I'm very much like a carrot over stick, even though I hate carrots. So I think it's a terrible metaphor. But I was much more into like, how do I make this just a strict net win? And giving people like, I can help you upgrade, I can help you experiment, I can help you go further. And the way we got it building then was just taking the production build nodes and just slapping VS Code on them and saying, great, you're now VS Code plus the build node that works. And it just slowly became an adoption to the point that we began saying, do you even need that Linux desktop anymore? And it's like, yeah, I guess I haven't really used it because I broke it at one point and I don't remember how to fix it. And yeah, I guess I can move on. So it was like this gradual, that part was a gradual transformation without having to mandate anything to anyone. And we still have people that use desktops today. but it was really helpful to kind of get to be able to give something that was just a net win, and we didn't have to start with taking anything away.
Yeah. We had actually, so our very beginning, our POC was very similar to that. It was we started with the POC, we spun up some instances, and the people that were on the POC loved it. And so they were slowly migrating off. And over time, over the first course of the POC and the beta, we had people naturally migrate over. And then once it got to a certain point, management handed us a stick and said, use this. So we were kind of forced into a situation where the rest of the ship or everyone had to join. But at that time, I think we'd proven ourselves enough that it was like that what we were doing was the right way to go. And even some of the holdouts, the more senior engineers who had joined Splunk when I joined, so for many years, who were very much, I would say, against or didn't really want to make that move because they were very comfortable where they were at. At that point, they were like, yes, okay, we'll move over, grudgingly. But then, of course, now there are power users, so it's how it goes.
If I could recommend any book for someone who's in developer productivity, it's Leading Change by John Cotter. If you haven't read it, but it really talks through, basically proposes the idea that if you had if you want to make people that are excellent transformational changes, people get hired by like Walmart and change like a 2-3 million employee company. How do they get cultural change at that? Do they do it randomly or do they have a plan? And the what you described there was the perfect adoption curve, right? It's the get the early users and excited. But exactly. There's a lot about developer productivity that is change management, which is funny because it sounds like it's referring to like GitHub, but it's actually how do you get transformational change in a business and how do you get those power users to advertise for you? Because you can't get something like Coder adopted without that loudmouth individual at the lunch table going like, wow, this shit's really cool, and getting you into it.
Well, and I think you get the best transformational change when it is somewhat starts ground up.
Yep.
Yes, you can have someone at the ELT level or management level mandate something, but at that point you aren't really getting, I think, the requirements right, and you're not really understanding the problem scope. You're just being kind of mandated a change. But I think when the change actually comes in to be truly transformational, it really has to, and to change a culture, it has to start within those involved with it. And then it becomes their idea. It becomes, they are helping to instigate the change. And then it be much more organically to me. And it will, and then at one point it will reach that, that tipping point. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think both of you have awesome, I think one similarity between like both of your stories is you found a really painful local workflow, whether it's, managing different versions of Ubuntu and different drivers, or having to push up into CI to be able to reproduce a change, and then layering on a shiny new thing, in this case, a cloud developer environment to kind of augment that local workflow. So then the developer can move to the shiny new thing and use that. Speaking of, shiny new things and government mandates, government mandates. Speaking of shiny new things and top-down mandates, generative AI is the buzzword of the last 3 years. And I'm really curious to hear your stories around operationalizing and taking a very hype technology, also definitely a shiny new thing, both for developers and for folks at the top. And what does it take to actually implement generative AI in your organization? And what are some of the maybe benefits you've seen and some of the struggles as well?
So I think coming from an AI-centric company who builds AI drones, and we have AI and deep learning teams, and we're building AI as a concept, it'd be very weird to have a developer go like, man, that AI stuff, I'm just not aligned with it. Like, that would be a weird position to be in. So we were luckily able, we didn't have people being against the overall concept. You have a little bit of the fear of you'll see a developer, you'll introduce them to something like ChatGPT or anything, but you introduce them to the early versions of that, and you'd have like a C++ embedded programmer working on the kernel who would paste in a very specific problem that only, 100 people on the planet can solve. And they're like, look, I got it. It wasn't able to solve my problem. Look, Gen AI is not that good. And you're just like, what are you doing? So we had a lot of that initial, people trying to use their hardest problem against it. But I think to get AI originally adopted inside our organization, it was a lot of convincing people not to try to use AI to solve their hardest problem today. have it solve the problem that you're not even interested in learning how that solution works. It's not part of the job that you like. Like filling out your end of year review. Nobody likes that. You could just have ChatGPT fill that out for you. No, but jokingly, actually, that was one of the things that came up internally.
I'll have to use that then.
Hopefully no HR professionals listen.
Right? I'm looking over at the camera, I'm probably in trouble. It's fine. But that was like an initial introduction, and we're just starting to explore the idea of agentic AI and this next idea of AI-based IDEs and stuff like that. What's been hard is that a lot of these are like small startups that don't have their security ducks all in a row. They do now a lot more than they did a year ago. And so if you work in a company that works on national defense or anything that's cybersecurity, you can't just take a startup's new thing and you ask them where's your SOC 2? Do you have FedRAMP? Do you have ISO? Yes. And they're like, what's an administrator?
Yeah, right. Yeah. What keys? What? Yeah. I think that is the same for us. It is, yes, the shiny object. The developers want it. I think the developers are at least at Splunk, the developers are very much interested in it. I remember we had this, in all hand meetings, over the last year, people were always asking about what can we do with it? Do we have a policy yet? Where do we stand on it? So I think the thirst is there for being able to use it. It's a matter of, like you said, getting the ones that will actually clear the various hurdles, making sure the models or the vendors who are able to present it we can actually use. And so our journey is just now starting with some of the agentic AI and looking at we have one tool that a team is already looking to actually start some integration there. So we're hoping that then they will pave the way and cut all the red tape that they need to, and then we can hopefully come in with Coder and add on to that and provide more. So still in the early stage. You'll have to have me back probably next year and to talk more about where it is then. So
as a developer productivity professional, besides end of year reports, what are you most excited to offload to AI, or where have you already started to use AI in your day-to-day jobs?
Front-end engineering, Java, automatically writing JavaScript for the love of God.
Automatic writing PowerShell. So that's
yep.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of I think at least for right now, it's been really great to be able to, just the other day, just a few days ago, be able to ask questions about very specific problem in a context I don't have 100% depth on, and to be able to get an answer and then be able to say, okay, yeah, now I understand. I can go back to the team and say, okay, this is where we're wrong. So, and to be able to do that, as well as the obvious, here, take this bash script, give me PowerShell. I don't speak Windows, that kind of thing. So
I've written a lot of PowerShell with ChatGPT. With ChatGPT.
Okay, yeah.
Prior to
my condolences.
Prior to ChatGPT, I did a lot of Stack Overflow, PowerShell, and really glad to not have to really think about that ever again.
Yeah. Focus on the problems and let the AI figure out the syntax.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What I really want is so Skydio hires some of the best autonomous engineers in the world, and they build drones that can land in 40-mile-an-hour winds at night while it's raining and there's an earthquake, and the drone will still land exactly where it needs to be. These people are unbelievably smart, well beyond anything I can do. But man, they don't make tools that have good user interfaces, right? They've got their specialty. They can do all this really complex drone AI, but then they come up with these ideas for man, I could build this tool that could really help people interface with the system or work with it. And their ability to take that and just turn it into a pleasant UI because of this huge discrepancy between trying to write TypeScript and JavaScript versus write the back end. So I want to imagine a world where with generative AI, we can start to say, yeah, your ability to take this idea that works on your box or this shell script and turn it into a user interface that's easy to use. We can lower that barrier to nothing. And at that point, I think you could see so much productivity improvements internally across all these people that have all these great ideas that don't quite know enough languages to get it across the line.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think in computer engineering in general, you have a lot of people coming in from other fields, robotics, AI.
Yeah.
And they come in, they learn how to program to help do their job in that field. Whereas you have people who study computer engineering as just a pure field. But I think we were talking about this earlier. It's almost like you're going to end up having someone who, just like you learn biology or you learn chemistry, you know those things, but that's not your job. You go and you learn. So if I'm going to be, let's say I'm going to go be a structural engineer, and I could use AI to help me do the things I need to do. So computer science as a field may not be a discrete field anymore. Your AI is becoming this thing where it's, computer science you have theoretic computers because AI and programming is in everything. Like almost every field. We always see it in artists. People can use AI to generate art. So why are we scared that AI is, I think we should embrace it. I think that's what I'm saying. It's really pushing in, and it's going to go way beyond what we have in just developer productivity.
Well, one thing that comes to mind,
jumped questions even.
Well, no, one thing that comes to mind based on what you said is, for folks who, learn programming almost as a second or third language, as like an accessory to their true expertise, whether it's like math, physics, AI research even, which programming is a big part of, but it's almost secondary or tertiary to your core. Like, there's a lot of, what do you call it? Like spaghetti code, I guess, and things aren't source controlled. And because these folks don't have to or don't necessarily want to become an expert in, creating the best UI, doing source control, all the time, things like that. And I could see generative AI helping essentially, in some sense, clean up the spaghetti.
I might just make more spaghetti, but spaghetti's great. Let's spaghetti.
We love spaghetti. But I guess help folks like use tools that, again, they're not like an expert in, and still create something usable and portable out of it. So it could be super interesting for that.
Yeah. And I think that in developers, I think that's the same thing applies for developers. There are facets of software engineering that not every developer knows, and so I think it frees the developer to open up other areas. Like, you don't have people who are just TypeScript or just Python developers, and they can become, it's not so much about the language that they have to program. They can actually get their ideas out there, based on and using AI to help them evolve that. But they have the software fundamentals, but now they're not restricted.
There's like a world where, so I have a young kid, and I'm looking at schools, and I remember one of my criteria for looking at schools was like, I want to know that starting in middle school, she's got a programming class, because, she can do whatever career she wants to do in her life, but I am hard to imagine a world in the future where understanding how to automate and code isn't going to be relevant anymore. And so I think a lot about that future. And, it might be silly to imagine a future where you take a class on how to use AI, but like maybe it's not crazy, or, I'm curious if the world ends up evolving where the specialty, the skills that you learn are how to interface with AI tools, or whether the AI tools get so good that they learn how to interface with you.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's going to get to a point where, like I said, you don't go study AI or computers necessarily unless you want to be a theoretical engineer or like theoretical computations, or you're doing something like you really need to know the ins and outs of how computers really work. Most of us will be able to do our job using computers without realizing it. Like we will become software developers, if you will, without having to be a software developer.
Yeah. a little bit about my story. The first programming language I learned was Python, and then PHP, and then JavaScript, and a lot of
interesting journey.
that is a background. I'm like, wow, that went backwards.
I loved PHP, by the way, and then JavaScript, and then I got into like the mean stack, and then I started learning. I created a lot of apps that way, and then I started learning, moving from kind of interpreted languages to compiled languages. But I could have existed on that stack for like the rest of my career. And it's really interesting because I was much more interested in, making something and not necessarily understanding how it runs. Now, there's a lot of scalability issues with like, not really understanding how things are executed and whatnot. But I do see another layer above interpreted languages, which essentially prompt engineering and AI engineering. So it's going to be really interesting to see, the next generation, I suppose, of software developers.
Your journey makes a lot of sense to me because the way you describe it, those things to a degree were a means to build a product. And as a person who's specialized in product as your career, and I think it's something where I don't know, this is a little bit to an aside, but something that I've found a lot of developer productivity professionals sometimes forget is the thing that made them a developer productivity professional was their desire to tinker all the way to the roots to understand exactly how something works. And they can't fall asleep till they figure out exactly what happened. But those people aren't necessarily good at building products. And they're not necessarily good at building like end-to-end productive things because they've got this other part to them. And the way that you build a productive, bigger company, I think, is a mix of personalities of people that are like, I don't care as much how it works. I care about what it does. And, so I don't know, that resonates with me as someone who then ended up specializing in product. You're like, I just cared about solving problems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's funny now, though. I am getting more and more interested in lower and lower levels. So I've written a little assembly now, and I'm reading a book about how processors work and what a clock is, and all of it. And so I am digging deeper out of curiosity. But as a programmer, I'm perfectly happy hanging out up in that interpreted language level. So.